Hi, this is Billy Tarasio with the Modern Divorce Podcast, and today I am so excited to be joined by Dr. Leslie Sherlin. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm
Good.
so excited to have you here today because you have such an interesting background and such an interesting perspective as um, kind of a performance coach, right?
Yeah, I think maybe coach might be too
Too
in.
broad.
Yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
broad thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think some of the people who do what I do in many ways call themselves a performance coach or a performance enhancement specialist, or technically our certification from the sports psychology group is as a mental performance consultant. So, but it gets into that. All of those things kind of fit into that same piece. Yeah.
Well, I love that. A mental performance consultant, and I think that
Yeah.
that's just a perfect thing for us to talk about today because um, when many people are facing divorce, they find their mental performance to
Mm,
be um, a little prohibited, a little inhibited, a
right.
little diminished. Like they find they
Sure.
can't remember anything. They're having a hard time concentrating at work. Like if their whole world's falling apart and they're a busy professional or just trying to, make
Yeah.
tough decisions at the same time they feel their mental capacity to be compromised. I want to talk about what we can do with that. But before we dive into that, tell me a little bit about your background.
So I I'll try to keep it to the more succinct, brief version, but it's a little bit relevant to the overall idea of performance. So when I first entered into the professional world as a college student, I was aiming to be a musician, and that really frustrated me in many ways because there were other people who worked way less than I did and were way better than
Oh,
I was.
wow.
So there was something that stood out to me, and I didn't quite grasp the idea at the time. I thought it was either just talent, or like we chalked it up to things that like, oh, I'm just not capable, or I'm not talented enough, or any of those kinds of things, and didn't really think about it much except to know that that wasn't the way that I was going to be able to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
So bounced around a bit and finally landed in psychology. And in studying psychology, I got really interested in the brain's contribution to our overall experience. So,
Mm-hmm.
why did somebody who was depressed look different?
Mm-hmm.
And so that led me down a particular path of what we call psychophysiology. Then I continued on to finish a master's in clinical psych, and then finished a doctorate in psychology. Then
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't enough. I felt like I needed more. So I embraced this idea of imposter syndrome and went back to school again, got another doctorate in pastoral clinical counseling. That was because I had a lot of individuals who were bringing their faith into their experience. And so I wanted to be smarter about that.
Wow.
Then went back again because I was working in athlete performance a lot, and that's a whole different thing. So I respecialized in sports psychology. And then I wanted even more. So then finished then another master's in counseling. So
Oh.
just so I don't
Dr.
know how smart I
Sherlin.
am, but I'm well educated at least.
Yeah,
So that's how I
that's
landed here.
that is a very wide amount of experience and
Right.
education. How long have you been working with individuals?
So I've always been dabbling. So about let's see, my gosh, time flies. Around 2009, I started working with athlete populations. Before that, working with garden variety mental health issues, the stuff that most people experience, ADHD, anxiety, depression, those kinds of things. But that was early on. That was a really applied in a supervisory, like I was being supervised strongly, working with physiological things and some research pieces. But then in 2009, started branching out more in the entrepreneurial space of finding applications for performance and doing a lot of research, and then landed in helping and working with clients over the past probably 15 years. And now that's my primary goal,
Mhm.
and where I find the most enjoyment is working with individuals as they face life's challenges.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. And so how often are you working with somebody who's going through a divorce?
Surprisingly, very frequently, or maybe it's not surprising to you.
Not to me.
It's right. It's very common, and even if it's not in their current experience, meaning they're in the midst of it at the moment, it is either leading up to or like trying to figure out the challenges and make those tough choices of how long is too long to hold on and how am I giving up too soon. Those kinds of things come up quite frequently. And then obviously afterwards there's a redefining of who we are. If I'm not that person's partner anymore, who am I? What am I? For a lot of people, it's like the opportunity in some ways to hit the reset button and do things differently. And so they're exploring that space. And they're generally, adults who are most commonly, 30 plus, and sometimes they're even in their later years and they're just have to figure everything out again. And so we try to find the good side, the opportunity side of that challenging situation, as much as resolving the traumatic experiences that they've gone through. So, but anyway, all that to say, to answer your question, very frequently, it's very common in the adult population that I work with that is a contributor to their experience.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, and I'm glad that you kind of broke it up into well,
Hmm.
into three separate issues. You've got
Right,
the issues and the mental health kind of crises that you're facing before you get divorced, especially if you're the person leaving or if you know that it's coming. And
right,
then you've got the immediate crisis of, the period of the divorce. And that's not like the divorce decree, it's the period of separation
right,
and not the legal part, but the redefining your life and
right,
figuring out how to operate. And then you've got a couple years out looking back at the disaster that just happened to say, whew, like what do I do now?
right. And
Um,
how do I not get in that situation again? What's
yeah,
wrong with me? People often they internalize it of, and it's rightfully so, to say what was my contribution to this experience.
right.
But more importantly for most people is, how do I not end up here again?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And process the trauma
Yes,
that always happens
for sure.
to everyone who goes
Absolutely.
through that process.
That's right. In the most amicable circumstances, it is still a trauma because we all feel that it is a failure point. And sometimes that's the case, and sometimes it's just two individuals who end up in different places, and it's not a real failure. And figuring that out and coming to grips with, I am not a failure, it's just this relationship didn't succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two separate things, and we often get caught up. And so that's part of that traumatic experience, is the internalization of the feelings of failure and disappointment. And then there's the grieving of the relationship. I mean, that it really is a loss. Even in bad circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
it's still a loss.
Yeah. I also see people experience a lot of trauma with regards to their religion or their friend
Mm,
groups or their families. And so
right,
even if the relationship itself, that part has been grieved, there's often like almost secondary traumas that people deal
absolutely,
with. And so
absolutely.
for today, I want to focus on when you're in the worst of it. You can't concentrate. Your whole life has been flipped upside down. I've got, busy professionals with important jobs and they don't know how to function. What can you tell them?
Well, that's a kind of it's a big question. It's loaded, and that we could spend a long time diving in. So I'll answer it in like a high level and then kind of dig in as you want. But at the highest level, the first piece is just the awareness that what we're experiencing most of the time is a normal reaction to an unnormal situation, and that's a big deal. And this carries across lots of things, but divorce is like or that loss, all of it, we have all these reactions. We start self-doubting, we start getting very distracted by our internal thoughts and dialogues. We can't concentrate, and our other types of things may go down, not only our physical performance in things like our job duties, but that mental piece is where we really start to suffer in our reaction to other people, like the emotional reactivity that we have. We're irritable or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And the first piece is just acknowledging and becoming okay that what's happening to me is a normal reaction and to an unnormal circumstance. This isn't something that we plan for. It's not something that we hope for. It's just happening. So that's kind of that first piece, is figuring that out and being okay with it. And then from there, that takes, surprisingly, just that acknowledgement takes a lot of the guilt and shame, and that piece away. And because a lot of the emotional turmoil that happens is, what do others, even my partner or my family or friends, all those units that you mentioned, what are they going to think about me, and how are they going to, and we kind of have to let that part go. So at the highest level, we acknowledge, and then we begin to dissect and analyze things in a structured way. And if we can figure things out in a structured way, it takes some of that anxiety away. So when we don't know what's about to happen, or we don't know what is happening, all we can do, like our body's natural reaction, our brain's natural reaction, is to sort that stuff out,
Mm-hmm.
get comfortable, know what's coming up. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the distractibility comes in. That's where the decreased ability to engage in certain activities comes from, is that uncertainty and unknown. So in a very systematic way for many people is, okay, let's dig into, what's your living situation going to look like? What is the finances going to look like? What are your relationships and roles going to look like? And what do you want them to look like? The more we can label those things, even if it doesn't turn out exactly the way that we hope or want or plan, we can start to put at ease that internal chatter of, oh no, what's happening? Your body's like literally responding in a fight or flight response of,
Mm-hmm.
I need to escape all this turmoil, I need to get some things figured out. And that distracts us. Literally, it's there's a model, it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the idea, if our physiological needs are met, I'm not hungry,
Mm-hmm.
then and I have shelter and I'm warm and all those things, then I can move up and start to worry about love, affection, and then we gradually move up this pyramid to self-actualization. But along that path, if we're not feeling loved and belonged, like belonging to a unit and have those things figured out, then the rest of it doesn't matter. And so work and career and all those kinds of things just naturally take a back burner to the prioritization of getting our basic needs met. So by settling that, then we can transition. And then the kind of that third phase after that would be, now how are your specific performance duties and job and emotional context, how are those impacted? And that can look very different depending on who the individual is, where they're coming from, and what the circumstances are that led them to this place.
Okay, so that was a ton.
Oh, and that's the Reader's Digest version. That's the small version.
So here is what I think I heard you say. Number one, acknowledge that what's happening, your lack of concentration, you're falling apart. Acknowledge that it's normal. Don't judge it. Be
That's right.
okay with it. Forgive yourself.
Yeah, and I really like that you added the don't judge yourself part in there. I'm not sure if I
Mm-hmm.
use those words, but it's a big piece of it, is
Yeah.
this non-judgmentality of the circumstance. Really, really critical to
Yeah.
our ability to accept what's happening to us.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. I see people sitting across the desk from me who are very smart people who cannot remember their address when they're filling out an
Mm,
intake form. And it's not because they don't know their address.
right.
It's just because, like, at this moment, your brain isn't functioning the
Yeah.
way that it normally does. And it doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean that you are defected. You just have to kind of forgive yourself, take deep breaths, slow down, lower your
Yeah.
expectations.
And for many people, that, I mean, it's not unlike having been in a car accident or some other traumatic sequence of events where you're literally in shock. My brain is trying to prioritize what is happening to me right now. And we might be in such a tailspin because either we didn't see this coming or we just never planned for it,
Mhm.
whatever the circumstance. There is a shock element. And when you're in shock, you are not you're not yourself. You're not thinking in the way that you typically do, and
Mhm.
that then causes people to freak out a little bit more. Even it's like, oh my god, what's happening to me?
Right.
I can't do basic things, and then we get caught in this really negative loop of
Right.
cycling downward. Yeah,
And so the second thing you said is plan. Even if the plans don't end up being what you do, the
that's right.
act of planning,
Yes,
and
critical.
talk to me a little bit more about that. Like, how does that affect our brains?
So, well, your brain is generally, we're creatures of, we are more comfortable, and this is what also in facilitates people potentially being in this place is, we've heard the expression or the cliche of the devil that you know is better than potentially a better scenario because it is unknown. We will find comfort in predictability and knowing what's happening. And we are willing oftentimes to go past much better opportunities, whether it's job, career, like whatever it is, because we know what we already are in, and that unknown is very scary. So when we don't know what's happening, I don't know where I'm going to live, I don't know what my finances will look like, I don't know who my friends or family will be, or how so and so will think of me, and that's not it. I'm like purposefully not talking about all the stuff, our expectations, and how maybe you mentioned like their faith or religion and their family, like culture, all those kinds of things I'm deliberately leaving out, but they play a critical role because that starts a questioning. But when we don't know the practical pieces, it causes us significant distress because our brain is not wired to be in that state. We're made to just know what we want to do and how to do it and what's going to happen today. So if we can plan that out, if we can start to understand, then our brain has, I mean, I'm using this metaphorically, it's not technically what's happening in our brain, but we become more comfortable because we have an expectation of where we're headed, of what's going to transpire. So that causes a decreased arousal to our environment. So imagine, like we could use lots of biological models of animal behavior, but when you take any animal out of its habitat and put it into a foreign environment, it's losing all sense of what was normal and is now trying to figure out what is that normal. Where is my food source? Where is my shelter source? All those things. And we're no different. In fact, we're more complicated than that because we start worrying about all the potential things that may never happen. So we've got not only the uncertainty of where we are, but the uncertainty and the fear and the projection of what are all the possible bad things that could happen to me and how can I keep that from happening. So it's really a compounded, it's just an internal mental mess, so to speak. And by creating that plan, even if it's not what happens, that provides comfort. It's like, okay, here's my next step. And I'm assuming probably this happens in your world of when people come in the first bit, they're just so overwhelmed and confused. And when you lay it out of here's how this process goes, oh, okay, I know what to do next. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the process of planning, the process of having help and knowing that somebody's going to guide you just is
Yeah.
just provides a lot of relief. And maybe even just articulating your fears
Mm-hmm.
also really helps people. Um, but the last thing that you said, which I think we could spend also just a ton of time on, is understanding and ranking your needs.
Mm-hmm.
And now, so for people who are not familiar with the hierarchy, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm just pulling it up. I had it on hand because I knew this would come up, and it's an important piece because really this is true for all of our life. But what it's particularly important and relevant for us to understand during transition points, and this is potentially one of the biggest transitions that someone can have in their adult life. And so, first is our physiological needs, and this is so. And what I mean, like to set the stage a little bit, is that if you're hungry and you don't know where your next meal is, you're not really worried about, am I happy in my career? And, like, how is my, situation with, what do other people think about me? Those things don't come into your mind because I'm hungry. I need to get fed. So this physiological needs is the most basic element. And that includes, our food, our water, our shelter. What is my living experience like? And this is something that comes into question sometimes when we're in the midst of a relationship ending. So that most basic need, once we figure that out, then we can start to worry about our safety needs. Am I safe? And we know that even in not every relationship that ends is amicable, and it's not always a safe place. I mean, there's circumstances that may have brought the person to this point where they don't feel that they are safe, either literally physically unsafe or emotionally or financially or whatever that looks like. So the safety needs are the second layer in this pyramid. Thirdly is the belongingness and love needs. And so we might call this I think about this or conceptualize it in our relationships, and we might use the phrasing support system. Who else is in your life? Who are your kids or your, your siblings and parents and all those kinds of? Who is that support system? The stronger that is, and the more connected you are in that community, the more helpful it is. The easier it will be for you to identify and take care of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be the third one. And then above that would be esteem needs. This is also challenged in this situation because this is like the concept of like, how do I feel about my achievements and my accomplishments and who am I? We generally, under normal circumstances, think about this from an educational or a career standpoint, our job. But now this, like going through a relationship ending, it now puts into question, who am I? How do others judge me? What are the perceptions of others on me? And so that calls into question this layer of the hierarchy of needs as well. And then lastly, the very pinnacle, if all of these other needs are being met, then we get to self-actualization. And that's just our ability to achieve our full potential, whatever that may be. So it includes our hobbies, it includes our relationships, it includes our faith or other types of things, all the attributes of life. Are we able to get there and satisfy ourselves through those means? And so you can see how, like, all of those things progressively, we are building them as we move through life, getting our basic needs met and moving up that thing. Well, when we go through a divorce, it's all of those are in question. Like the whole thing comes crumbling down, and it's overwhelming because now nothing makes sense to me.
Yeah. So I think that's true. I think the entire pyramid is then
Yeah.
is pretty much torn apart, at least down to the safety level.
Right.
Like most people probably, well, many people also need to worry about where they're going to live and
Right.
what's going to happen financially, but every person is not safe
Right.
in an emotional place, or in, like,
Right.
they're just not. And so how are I mean, do we go back to step two and just start planning our way through that? Or how do we become okay enough to
Yeah.
function and make good decisions? Because the other thing that I've read over and over again is that when we're compromised and when we're threatened, we make worse decisions, which
That's
is
right.
not helpful.
Exactly. In fact, we make really bad decisions because we're not thinking clearly and we're not seeing all the angles. And that's where another person can be very helpful. Usually, it can be part of the support system that already exists. It can be someone that you reach out to, a counselor, a therapist, those types of individuals. So, generally, the clients that I have worked with who have been in this situation, that's what they're relying on me to help them do. Like, they come in and they want to both process the feelings, like unpack, here's all the stuff that I'm feeling and thinking. And then not only is it just that verbal articulation that helps them think about things differently, but they're almost asking the question, like, am I crazy? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, am I about to make a bad choice? And so it is that dialogue of exploring, well, what would it look like if you did that? What would happen if this happened? And then getting comfortable with the possible outcomes and saying, yeah, I think that's the decision that makes the best. So it's unusual that the person that you're looking to should tell you what to do.
Right.
But the person you're relying on to vent to, whether that's a family member or a therapist or whatever it is, the idea is for you to explore your options and get some solid objective feedback about what the implications could be. But yeah, it literally is that of going all the way down, like, or what am I going to do? Here's what I'm thinking. Does it make sense? It's a validation, very much a validation point.
So slow down your decision making. Make sure you're getting input of people who are not in crazy fight or flight mode.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And in your experience, how long does it take people to process and get to the place where they maybe are back to normal?
It's a really tough one because the circumstance can vary so much. How long has this relationship been? Who's involved? What are the implications? I don't think that anybody takes it lightly. That it's I'm good by next weekend kind of a thing. But it does widely vary. Where some individuals, I would say, weeks to months, where other individuals, maybe it's either more complicated, there was a lot of abuse or other types of circumstances, and that can take much longer to resolve, particularly if it's a historical kind of a pattern, where if the reasoning why they ended up in a bad relationship is more of a systemic pattern or a systemic thought process that maybe needs to be revamped into healthier patterns, that can take a little bit longer. The situation, the acuteness of just going through the divorce can be weeks to months, but some of that baggage can take longer. So it's really a complicated question depending on the circumstances and the individual. How healthy were we coming into this? What kind of challenges was I facing leading up to it?
Mhm.
That matters a lot.
Well, I think, we at Modern Law typically recommend that every person going through divorce go see a counselor. Because it is such a big deal, and it's so much more than a legal transaction.
Mhm.
How often do you recommend someone see a counselor?
Depends on them. If they're in crisis, then once a week is kind of helpful until we kind of get our feet on the ground. Ultimately, there's not a recipe that works for every person. I mean, there's financial implications, there's time implications, and then there's the level of distress. So I would say an individual could go as frequently as weekly, and they could, lots of individuals, after they kind of get their footing down and they figure out, they establish the relationships, it's every other week for a bit. And then if we're resolving things, if we're making some significant progress, then it tapers down maybe once a month, once every couple of months, whatever. So there's not a real formula, but the level of distress, if we're in crisis, frequently is not a bad thing, and people shouldn't feel that is bad, that it somehow diminishes or is an indication that they are somehow mentally weaker or anything like that, just because they're needing more support. Depends on
Mhm.
who else is in their world too. Do they have other family members who are supporting them? And there's a lot of variables in there, and that's why I think before we move on from that idea, the reason why that feels so uncertain to people is there isn't a recipe. It isn't that this process takes 2 weeks and then you're going to feel question yourself for 8 weeks and then you're going to move on with your life. It doesn't work like that. And
Mhm.
so people start asking their friends, hey, have you been through this? What was it like for you? And then if their experience doesn't match that, they go, wow, something must be wrong with me.
Mm.
And it's not that anything is wrong with you. It's your circumstance is different.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because people do look to their peers or friends or online to figure out, am I normal?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that what you said is just really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
So, how can people find you if they want to meet with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is to find me online, which is Dr. Sherlin, DrSherlin.com. Every,
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to have that in our show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I could have spoken with you on all these things for a long time, but I think this was
yeah.
a really good episode. So I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
great. Well,
Yeah,
thank you for the opportunity.
absolutely. We'll see you soon.
Okay.